Hi, my name is Sam Woods. I'm a tour leader for Tropical Birding Tours, a full-time tour leader, and I'm going to be taking you through today the virtual tour of the Upper Texas coast and the Hill Country. And to be clear on that, the Upper Texas coast is the main tour, which is 7 days long, going to and from Houston at the beginning and ends. And then the Hill Country, which is out further west, is an extension which brings the tour to 10 days if you do that as well. And that ends in Houston too. So to and from Houston, 7 days if you just do the Upper Texas coast, and 10 days if you do the Hill Country too. And I'm going to be modeling a series of t-shirts here from my time in Texas. This is Birds Y'all. It's a Houston Audubon t-shirt. I'll be doing some rapid changeovers, rather like theater on this trip. Okay, so let's move on to where is Texas. So if you're not from the United States, you might need a bit of education here. So Texas is one of the southern states in the United States. It's a massive state. It's twice the size of Germany and Europe. So it's one of those places that it has a lot of different areas. And so it deserves more than one tour, which is why Tropical Birding do multiple tours there. So this one covers two main areas, the Upper Texas coast on the main tour, and then the west of there, the drier Hill Country, which has some specialties too. This is sort of one of the famous beers in Texas, Shiner Bock. I can vouch for its quality. It's very, very good. I can honestly say I've drunk way too much of that in my time over the years there. And then there's the Texas state flag there, the Lone Star State as it's known. Just thought I'd throw in a few famous Texans here, and I'll get myself off the screen. Roy Orbison, George Strait, Waylon Jennings, a pioneer of outlaw country, and a few other country stars like Miranda Lambert, Casey Musgraves, Leanne Womack, and the bearded ones, the ZZ Top. They're all sort of famous Texans among a very, very long list. And before we get onto the birds, it's also got some world records for Texas is big, as I say, one of the biggest states, and they are very proud of that. And so it has some of the biggest things, like the biggest gas station and convenience store is in Texas, and I've seen it, and there's like something like 120 pumps for cars. The store inside is absolutely massive, even by American standards. So yeah, that's just a little thing you can look forward to on the tour. I've just popped back up here if you didn't notice, so let me guide you through this bit. This is where the main tour is basically focusing on, which is High Island, which is on the Upper Texas coast, and we stay in a town nearby called Winnie. This is a hot spot for migration, spring migration, April and particularly late April being the peak time for masses of birds coming through the area. So the main tour is about migration and getting lots and lots of migrants. And this is this sort of breakup of the tour here. We've got the Upper Texas Coast main tour section, which has got a cluster of sites sort of southeast of Houston. And then out west, we've got the Hill Country extension. So they're very, very different parts of Texas. And so you can add an awful lot in only a few days doing the Hill Country. As I said, the whole thing on the first part of the tour is really about migration. Migration's absolutely mega in this area, very famous. And what we're looking at here is, if you look on the map, on the lower map, which is from Cornell, something like 3.5 billion birds come through the region in spring, which is a staggering amount. And what we're particularly interested in, I'm going to use the cursor here on the map on the left. You see that orange kind of channel there. What happens is a load of birds, migrant birds that winter in Southern and Central America. They move across the Gulf of Mexico, and then they land on the north side of the Upper Texas coast, somewhere like High Island, and also Sabine Woods, which is another place we also look for birds on this trip, just to the east of High Island. And they're kind of migration stopover sites. They're like important habitat where there's trees in amongst the surroundings of lots of salt marsh. So they're kind of islands of habitat that tired birds, after they've done a 600-mile crossing across the Gulf of Mexico, they may want to stop over before they continue their journey north to breed. Some of these birds breed locally in the south, like hooded warblers and prairie warblers and things like that. Other birds go way up north to breed, like blackpoll warbler, Blackburnian warbler, things like that. And so this particular area of High Island is dealing with birds that come across the Gulf, what's known as trans-Gulf migrants. If you look on the map there, you might see a yellow arrow, the yellow arrow here. This is called circumgulf migrants. They choose not to do this risky sea crossing and go around land instead. And some of them make it to High Island too, like Nashville warbler will be one of those. but they're less common because the trans-Gulf migrants are, the highlands smack bang in the middle of their migratory route. So that's usually what you're dealing with, and that's what the majority of spring migrant birds are, trans-Gulf migrants. And one of those that goes across the Gulf is the tiny ruby-throated hummingbird, which is unbelievable that it would fly a 600-mile journey across a sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and be able to survive that. But it does, and it does that every year. Okay, so here's a list of the main sites on the main tour, the Upper Texas Coast section. Essentially, we're based at Winnie, you can see on the map here. I'm going to circle it. This is a sort of the nearest town with many hotels in it. And then we spend a lot of time in the Highland sanctuaries here. High Island has sanctuaries for songbirds, like it has coastal woodlots with oaks and other good plants that songbirds like. So we spend a lot of time in High Island looking for songbirds. And also there's a rookery with nesting spoonbills and egrets there. That's also in High Island. Then we go along the Bolivar Peninsula as well here to go to Bolivar Flats. That's kind of the main area where you get stacks of coastal birds, lots of shorebirds, like thousands and thousands this time of year. And then we also have an area of freshwater area of wetlands called Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge there. So that whole area is in that area there. And then we also have another sanctuary called Sabine Woods by the Texas Ornithological Society, and that's a bit further east. And that sort of combines with High Island to give you a really good mix of migratory birds. And then the kind of outlying point we do for one day is we go up to Jasper for the night, and we go into Pine Woods where there's specialty birds, which I'll get to later. And that all comes in and out of Houston Airport. So that's the main sites for your main Upper Texas Coast tour. And to talk about my experience with this, so you're wondering why an English guy from London, who actually lives in Ecuador now in South America, is telling you about Texas. Well, Tropical Birding used to own this house here. You can see it's now owned by the Houston Audubon Society. And it's now known as the High Island Field Station for Houston Audubon. And we've been staying there for every spring for about 11 or 12 years now. And I was there for all but one of those. So I've come to know the Upper Texas Coast really well in spring. And during that time, I've also done some hill country days because I couldn't resist it being so close. So I've got to know it very well. I've been there about 12 times. Section, I'm going to take you through High Island, but not without showing you my next shirt. You've got to guess the warblers on them, I'm afraid. I'll leave it up to you. I'm going to tell you about High Island itself, one of the major centers of our focus of our attention on the main tour on the Upper Texas Coast. This is a picture of Boy Scout Woods, which is, if I showed you that house earlier we used to stay in, we still do stay in, it's just across the road from there. And this is one of the main sanctuaries. This is where you pick up your entrance patches, you'll pay for your entry, pick up any merchandise, field guides, and the volunteers will help you there. This is known as the grandstand. It overlooks like an area with a dripping tap, which basically attracts, dozens of birds when there's a new arrival of migrants, because they like to wash off the salt water they've got on their plumage as they cross the Gulf of Mexico, doing that ridiculous sort of 600-mile trip. Here's just some of the t-shirts that Houston Audubon merch, as you call it, which I've collected over the years. I've got a lot more than that, and there's lots of volunteers there that wear t-shirts going back 20 odd years or more, perhaps. Every year they release a patch. I'm going to take my mug off the screen here. So every year Houston Audubon release a patch, which you buy one per season, and that gets you into all the sanctuaries without having to pay every single time you come. So if you're going there multiple times, like on our tour, we go in and out multiple times to multiple sanctuaries, it's good to get a patch and you can collect it and keep them. And people do that, and I don't blame them. It's a really cool idea. Just get myself back on screen here. Okay, so now what High Island's about. So High Island's basically some isolated areas where it's a salt dome, which is just a little bit raised from the surrounding salt marshes and therefore allows trees to grow, particularly live oaks are a big one. And there's several sanctuaries on the island, the main ones being Boy Scout Woods I showed you there. Then there's one called Smith Oaks, which has a big wood lot, as well as having the rookery, where there's loads of nesting waterbirds. And then there's another really good one called Hook Woods, which is by the Texas Ornithological Society. And they're all within a mile of each other, so you can do all these places in a morning. It's not like you have to choose strictly where to go at any given minute. You can react to where the birds are So they're the main sort of migration woodlots in High Island, a small town in Texas. So yeah, you're going there to look for arrivals of migrants. And to make it clear, the arrival of migrants like this blue-winged warbler, for example, and this is a cerulean warbler, the way the Gulf crossings work with migration, the birds tend to come up from Central and South America, and they gradually make their way up north. And then as this sort of big wave of birds, not necessarily moving together as one coordinated flock, but just generally all on the move towards their their breeding sites in North America. They eventually get funneled into an area called the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So lots of them end up there because that's where the crossing across the Gulf is the shortest, because it juts out into the Gulf. And they build up there on this peninsula. And then when there's a nice evening with good, nice winds that sort of blow from the south, so it helps them going north, it blows behind them, giving them a good lift. They often leave on a nice clear sky in the evening, and the crossing time can take 16-20 hours. So even though they love to do it in one night, it's just too long to do so. And so they take the crossing at night, but they don't usually arrive till the afternoons, late mornings / afternoons in High Island and Sabine Woods, which is another place we also go for the migrants on this trip. So typically on this trip, it's a very flexible itinerary. And I'm going to move to the next warbler so you don't get bored. Here's a northern parula. So what do we do on this trip? We're going to visit High Island. We're going to visit all those sanctuaries I mentioned on High Island. And you're going to go to the freshwater sanctuary refuge of Anahuac. Also go to the peninsula of Bolivar Peninsula and look at Bolivar Flats for shorebirds. And also spend a day up in the piney woods too. But there's tons of sites, and each day you can kind of decide which ones to go based on where's best. What we typically do, because the migrants arrive in the afternoon, we typically spend the morning doing the coastal birds, the freshwater marshes, so we're free for the next batch of migrants in the afternoon. So that just to be clear. And sometimes, you might do Sabine Woods one afternoon, you might do High Island another afternoon, and that's kind of sometimes dictated on what's happening, what you've heard's happening there. So there's a degree of flexibility with the tour. You'll visit all the sites, but not necessarily in the order they show up here or on the website. It's you've got to be dynamic and flexible on a migration tour, and that's what makes it really exciting, of course. Here's a classic southern species of warbler, the worm-eating warbler. And a Kentucky, another southern one, Kentucky warbler. And I should say this is not all just about warblers. When these 3.5 billion birds come through, we're talking like migrant shorebirds, we're talking migrant coastal birds, which we'll get to shortly. We're talking vireos. There's 9 species of vireo possible on this trip if you also take the extension. We're talking buntings, orioles, thrushes, just loads and loads of different migrants in very big numbers, flycatchers too. Here's a brown thrasher, another migrant that actually winters in the area and also comes through as a migrant. So sometimes you're not sure if you're seeing one of the wintering birds hanging around or one of the new ones coming in. And this is another big group, really, really good group, is the tanagers. In High Island, they have these mulberry trees, and they tend to come into fruit in April at just the right time for the migrants, which is late April. And things like scarlet tanager will gather in them, summer tanager, sometimes indigo bunting, thrushes, grey catbirds, grosbeaks, rose-breasted grosbeaks. And sometimes these bushes can be bursting with migrants, because you can have dozens of these tanagers all mixing in together, both summer and scarlet tanager. This is actually one with a mulberry in its bill to prove my point. And here's the rose-breasted grosbeak, beautiful bird. And someone always told me it sounds like a sneaker or a trainer to us Brits, or a gym shoe, rubbing on a gym floor. And I always think that's a really good description of its sound. So hear it here, the gym floor / sneaker / grosbeak. So as you can see, we're looking at other migrants too, we tend to get focused on the warblers because they're so beautiful in springtime and the best plumage, but there's a whole bunch of other birds like these orioles, Baltimore oriole, blue grosbeak. They tend to like the edges of the woodland rather than deep inside. Painted bunting, the bird of many colours, as it were. This is always a prized bird there. They actually don't breed very far away at all. In fact, some probably breed on High Island. So, you sometimes get flocks of these on some afternoons in the spring when you get an arrival, and it's really exciting stuff. This is one of the scarcer ones, a type of goat sucker or nightjar called the Chuck Will's Widow. They breed in Texas actually, but they're quite hard to find roosting. They're quite skittish, but sometimes that happens. This one was photographed in Boy Scout woods. And then we move on to the other main attraction of High Island. So I've been through the thousands upon thousands of songbirds that come through, mostly in the afternoons. So we focus our tour visits there for the best time for arrivals. Because the other thing to mention about these songbirds is, yeah, they can come in the afternoons, but what can happen sometimes is they come in the afternoon, spend a short time, and then they're gone. Next morning they could be gone. So to be there when it's happening, when it's arriving, and actually see birds dropping in the trees that have just crossed a 600-mile piece of the Gulf, which is, it's kind of mind-blowing to think, oh, that bird was just crossing the Gulf just a minute ago. I've once seen a dickcissel dozing in a tree because it was clearly weary after the journey. So yeah, in Smith Oaks Woods, which is one of the sanctuaries I was saying on High Island, typically what you'll do is you'll do a bit of songbirding first, and then you'll go for the late afternoon, evening to the rookery, because the rookery has a ton of stuff going on, you know, spoonbills like this, fighting over sticks for their nests, birds displaying like this great egret. They display at this time when they have this beautiful bright blue skin on their face. That goes too for their snowy egret. They don't quite ever look as good as they do in spring. So you're watching all these from like observation platforms that Houston Audubon have erected. Very comfortable, very easy to photograph these birds, even with a non-flashy camera. And the reason why we time our visit for the evening here is, one, we can actually get and look out some of those migrant songbirds first, which of course is an exciting and thrilling part of the tour. And then two is because in the evening, you get all the breeding activity, which happens all day long, but you also get the fly-in of birds coming in every evening. Thousands upon thousands of herons, ibis, egret, spoonbills, cormorants, and hingers. All of these birds, they fly in their thousands in the evening to roost around the lake called Clay Bottom Pond, which is where the rookery is. So you just get this absolute spectacle of non-stop movement of birds coming in. And it actually goes on all year round, and Houston Audubon does counting of those birds on a very regular basis because the numbers are internationally important of those birds. And that really brings us an end to our time in High Island. With this virtual tour, I've taken you through High Island, which is all about the songbirds and the rookery. Now I'm going to move on to another section of the same tour, the Upper Texas Coast section. And the next t-shirt. This is a Birding High Island t-shirt with a magnolia warbler on it, drawn by an amazing artist from Ohio called Jen Brunfield. If you've met her, you'll definitely remember her. Amazing birder, amazing enthusiasm, and an excellent picture here. This is when High Island had an observation tower, when Tropical Birding owned the house just beneath it in the picture there. This is kind of a relic and an antique, this t-shirt now. So just to recap what we've done so far, I gave you a bit of an intro, explaining this is mainly a migration tour, the main tour that is, the Upper Texas Coast 7-day section. And then I took you through High Island, which was about coastal woodlots for migrants, and also about the rookery for breeding large water birds. Now I'm going to take you on to Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, which is one of the freshwater wetland sites you go to on the tour. So this is the cool thing about the tour. It has migrant woodlots for migrant songbirds. It has freshwater marshes. It has coastal birds. And then you also do the piney woods. There's those kind of core sections of the tour that differ greatly and make for very exciting birding, and they're not far apart. So you can actually cover the coast, the freshwater areas, and the coastal woodlots in the same day very easily. So typically, as I say, you do the freshwater marshes, the water birds and stuff like that in the mornings, and then you're ready for the big arrival of afternoon migrants just as they come in off the Gulf of Mexico. So let's go to Anahuac. This is a freshwater area. It has some farm fields around it where you get things like crested caracara, which is pictured here. The farmlands are also, they host things like meadowlarks and scissortail flycatchers. On the wetland areas and the marshy areas of the actual refuge itself, you've got things like American bittern, least bittern. It's a good place to have a two-bittern morning. It's full of rails, actually. King rail is a good one to find there. Along the coast in the salt marshes, you find the clapper rail. That's the easiest one to find. And there's also things like Virginia rail in here, yellow rail and black rail too, but they're very difficult. And here I'm just going to play you the call of the king rail. Kind of one of those classic freshwater sounds of Texas. So these freshwater areas are great for anhingas, or snakebird is another name for it, and hopefully this photo can make you understand why. I'll just shake my face out there. So also around Anahuac and sort of surrounding areas, you can get purple gallinule. Orchard orioles, they like the open spaces rather than thick woodlands, so you get them at the coastal woodlots, but sometimes they're more visible around Anahuac. Fulvous whistling ducks, a kind of southern specialty bit of duck. And then lower right, I should say, my other left, you've got the sedge wren, which is a kind of shy inhabitant of sedgy areas, both on the coast but also around Anahuac too. So yeah, this is one of the specialty ducks, mottled duck. It's kind of like the southern equivalent of the American black duck, which doesn't occur here. And I wanted to put this in because cattle egrets are very common in this part of Texas, and they're not exactly the star bird, but they look absolutely phenomenal in the season. So spring tours make it really interesting for the plumage of birds too. You may be familiar with the birds, but you may not be familiar with them looking quite like this, hopefully. And this is an interesting, so what you have good areas for shorebirds on the coast, but also inland near Anahuac, you have a load of fields, rice fields, which are various stages of water in the spring, and they change rapidly. So our guides are very up to date with that kind of thing. So it's like one day to the next, some could have water and some could not have water. They could be too flooded one day and then perfect the next day, and then the following day, the cycle of weather and the cycle of farming can change things rapidly. So things like Wilson's phalarope are best to look for in sort of wetland flooded fields. And in the fields along to Anahuac, we look for, in the drier areas, we look for upland sandpiper, which comes through as a migrant as well too in this time. I really like this picture, not because it's particularly sharp of the sandpiper, but it's a beautiful setting of flowers. So this is an upland sandpiper again. And other birds you can get in the fields include things like American golden plover, Hudsonian godwit, gold-billed terns are often in the fields migrating too. And then on the marsh, back to the marsh at Anahuac itself, you've got things like boat-tailed grackle around the marsh, while great-tailed grackle is the common one around urban environments in this part of Texas. And this is one of the star birds of Texas in the south, for sure, the scissor-tailed flycatcher. They typically sit on fence wires around the agricultural land. So yes, when you drive in and out of Anahuac, one of the most dazzling birds is for sure the scissor-tailed flycatcher. We can also see it around the coast. It's going to be very easy to find. They love fences, and just a magnificent bird. A classic bird of South Texas, a classic bird of the South. I think it's Oklahoma's state bird. And they get in really early, so there'll be lots of them around and breeding by the time you get there. The next slide's a bit of a trickery one, spot the bird. This isn't a particularly rare bird, but I really like them, and you can often see them coming in during the day. This is a common nighthawk, well hidden by agricultural land and cowpats, I think, here. And sometimes they're not very camouflaged or inconspicuous at all. You often find them like this in the spring because they've just come in and they just grab the first thing they can perch on, whether it hides them or not. Very regular this time of year is the eastern meadowlark giving out its amazing song, which you can hear in the background there. Another beautiful bird, if very common one. In this area, it's all eastern meadowlarks. And also another bird of the farm fields on the way in and out of Anahuac is dickcissel. They're usually coming through in late April, and some of them often, if you go there in the morning, which we usually do, you can often find them singing their distinctive songs, their buzzy kind of calls, from these sort of grassier fields, shrubbier fields. And I'm just going to let you listen to the dickcissel right now. Over to Dick. So that kind of brings an end to this second section about the Upper Texas Coast Main Tour, the sort of freshwater, wetland, marshy area and agricultural areas that we do around Anahuac, just north of High Island, only about 10 minutes from where we're staying. That's another thing I should mention is the drives on this main tour. The longest drives are to and from the airport, which are about 2 hours. Everything else is like an hour and a half or less, usually less. And you can get in loads of sites in one day because they're all so local to each other. So that's the end of the freshwater marsh section. I've done the woodlot section, and now we're moving into the coastal section of the Bolivar Peninsula. So now we're heading to the coast. I have to do a costume change, of course, and this is another Houston Audubon special. This is their actual logo bird, the yellow-throated warbler. So now we're doing this next section. We've done the woodlots, the migrant woodlots, the songbird areas, and now we're going towards the Bolivar Peninsula, which is just outside of Highland. It's about 27 miles long, and all the way along you have salt marshes, you have tidal areas, beaches, and then you have the huge tidal flats of Bolivar Flats Shorebird Sanctuary, Houston Audubon property along there, which is our ultimate destination. But we stop at a lot of spots along the way, one of which is the salt marshes to check out for seaside sparrow here. Sometimes they're in the same area as Nelson's sparrow. They occur in the same area. Rarely you also get LeConte sparrow too. And of course we're going to get tons and tons of coastal birds. This is an incredibly birdy morning. As I say, we usually do the sort of waterbird stuff in the morning and then go for the songbirds in the afternoon because that's the peak time of arrivals. So usually the highlight of our time in the Bolivar Peninsula is going to be this place, Houston Audubon's Bolivar Flats Shorebird Sanctuary. This is one of the tropical birding guides, just kind of sitting in amongst a mass of shorebirds. There's dowitchers in there, yellowlegs. There's, of course, a mass of American avocets behind him. There's some peeps just behind him too. It's just there's a piping plover just right down in the foreground, just here. I just spotted it there. So yeah, this place is about seeing thousands and thousands of birds up close and being able to really sort of try and ID these birds because you can see lots of similar species side by side. The avocets are one of the most impressive things, of course. They winter in the region, but they're usually still there in late April still. And the numbers usually around that time, about 10,000 avocets. And they often like clustering together. So if you get the right day on the right tide, you can just see a phenomenal number together. And they've got these beautiful rust heads in the spring. So a lot of them in breeding plumage at this point. And as you can see, they're mixing in with totally huge mix of other birds. So on the in terms of coastal birds, you've got lots of terns there. There's something like 9 species of regular tern. You've got black tern, common tern, Forster's tern. You've got royal tern on the top left here, sandwich tern on the bottom left here. I'll just get my face out of the way. Black skimmer in the top right, and least tern on the bottom right. Least terns actually nest here, and that one's got a fish that it's going to offer to its mate there. So yes, this is a good time of year to see breeding seabirds as well, like the royal terns on the upper left. They're going through courtship too. Now this is one of the black skimmers photographed at Bolivar Flats by me, just sort of passing a pack of royal terns. So I can't emphasize enough, the Bolivar Flats is just teeming with thousands of birds, and it's just an incredible place to see a lot of coastal birds, whether it be shorebirds but also other things. Shorebirds, of course, big attraction. These are some of the regular ones. You've got red knot in the top left, ruddy turnstone looking at its best on the bottom left, Dunlin with the black belly patch for breeding plumage on the top right, and a beautiful marbled godwit on the lower right. More shorebirds here. These are all plovers. It's really cool because you can look at a lot of the similar ones side by side. You've got snowy plover top left, Wilson's plover bottom left, then black-bellied plover actually with a black belly on the upper right, and then lower right you've got the endangered piping plover, which actually winters in good numbers in Highland, on the Bolivar Peninsula I should say, and they're usually still present at Bolivar Flats by this time. Singer dramatis shorebirds is the long-billed curlew. I just really like these birds, one of the biggest sandpipers. This is actually photographed on the beach at Bolivar Flats. Another interesting coastal bird, a lot of people, if you haven't been to the south, this will definitely be of appeal, the reddish egret. Now you're probably wondering why this one isn't reddish. They actually have white phases or white morphs, and they have the traditional dark morph, which I'm going to show you now. They actually both occur in Bolivar Flats, and you can often see them side by side. So as I say, that's wrapping up our coastal section. We spent at least one morning along there. It will not be unlively, let's just put it that way. It's a very lively, active morning. That brings us to the end of the coast. We've done the coastal woodlots, we've done the coast, actually the wetland birds, we've done the freshwater wetlands, and now we're heading to the final kind of area of the main tour on the Upper Texas coast, the sort of outlying area, the piney woods. T-shirt from the Houston Audubon. This one's with a prairie warbler, which just so happens to be one of the piney woods birds we're looking for. So not really in the pine woods, but I'll explain that a bit in a minute. So now we're going to talk about the Texas piney woods. So they're kind of indicated on that map on the left. So we're kind of normally, for most of the tour, we've been further south on the coast here, just near Galveston is the nearest city. And then we go up north to kind of what they call the East Texas Pine Woods, or the Piney Woods, they call them. This is a picture of Angelina State Forest, Angelina National Forest, I should say. And this is one of the birds we look for there. Usually this is an early start, this one. You usually get there in the morning to look for and listen for the Bachman sparrow. So they like these pine woods with just a little bit of kind of shrubbery, sort of sparse shrubbery in the understory. And even though they sit like this in the open, they're amazingly hard to spot. So typically how you find them is you listen for this call first. So let's listen to the Bachman sparrow, a piney woods specialty. So while we're in the piney woods, we're looking for piney wood specialties, but we also have, a lot of people maybe don't appreciate that you get a lot of southern warblers breeding there. And what happens sometimes on the coast is you might miss some of the early migrant southern warblers, which move through in the biggest numbers early in the month. But by this time they're on territories in this area. So, and pine warbler is actually very rare on the coast, but very common in the pine woods. So this is one of the birds we look for in the pine woods, the breeding pine warbler. And then this is one of the great specialties of the pine woods, the red cockaded woodpecker, an endangered species. So this occurs in the same area as Bachman sparrow, and it also occurs along with another specialty of the pine woods, the rather cute brown-headed nuthatch. So they're kind of the three main pine wood specialties, if you like, the brown-headed nuthatch, the Bachman sparrow, and the red cockaded woodpecker. But there's lots of other birds we won't see by going into the pine woods because the coastal woodlots have quite low numbers of breeding birds, even if they're excellent for migrant birds. So this is more about picking up breeding birds as well that don't necessarily come through the woodlots or may have missed us when we were in the woodlots. So this is kind of an edge area where there's plantations, and this is a great area to see things like prairie warbler. Prairie warbler is one that actually does come through the coast, but in such small numbers, it's not uncommon to not see it in High Island and then go up to these plantations where they're breeding and singing away, and you get marvelous views like this. So it's a sort of, the piney woods is not only about piney wood specialties, it's about a backup site for some of the warblers and other birds that just don't occur in good numbers on the coast. This is another one which is kind of interesting. Used to be considered a warbler until just a few years ago. It's now in its own family, just simply known as yellow-breasted chat. They actually occur in the same kind of habitat as a prairie warbler. So when we look for the prairie warbler, we're also looking for the chat and listening for the chat. So, so this area in the piney woods, we actually visit like lakes. We visit some swampy forest, which is mixed, and then we have pure pine woods. So there's actually, it's more than, even though it's called a pine woods day, and we stay a night up in Jasper for the night, it actually has got quite a mix of habitats. Hooded warblers are very common up there, so while we will probably see them around High Island, there'll be lots of males and territories and be very easy to see up in the pine woods by the time we get there. And this is kind of one of the specialties. This does come through High Island itself, and we have a good chance of finding in the sanctuaries, but quite often they can be sneaky and shy, whereas when you go up to their breeding areas like in Martin Dies, which is one of the areas around the pine woods, you go into more swampy parts where there's mixed woods rather than pure pine, and you can listen for the Swainson's warbler, and that's how we usually pick them out. We listen for their calls, which you can hear just in the background, I think. One of the great southern warblers, the Swainson's warbler. And Prothonic warbler, they're another one that likes the swampy areas, and another one with an absolutely explosive, distinctive call. And I'm going to play that in a second. So yeah, this is another one again. Could see it around High Island. Sometimes they're breeding in Ireland, but it doesn't help to have extra places for all these little gems. So over to Prothonic warbler, which I can barely say. Thank you. The things I should say about migration in this area of the upper Texas coast. One of the interesting things is that on the coast itself, many of the birds that are breeding very far north, like black-burning warbler, black-poll warbler, bay-breasted warbler, they don't tend to sing in the migration woodlots, the coastal woodlots. So southern warblers do, so hooded warblers, for example, do quite often, but you don't always locate the birds by sound. And one of the nice things about the piney woods day is you're actually going to breeding sites where they're breeding, so you have the beautiful songs as well. Whereas when you're in the coastal woodlots, you don't actually judge much by a dawn chorus. The dawn chorus can be largely full of northern cardinals and local breeding birds like blue jays, but you don't necessarily hear a cacophony of warblers that you do in the piney woods. So birds like this can be heard singing in the piney woods, the yellow-throated warbler. And the Louisiana water thrush, they're actually a specialty of the South, so a lot of northern birders coming in who want to get that. And so we look along riparian areas in the piney woods for that one. And we also have additional chances on the hill country extension if you're lingering on for that. And lastly, you get things like barred owl on the in the piney woods area and also on the extension. So High Island itself has a pair occasionally, but they're not always there. So you really need bigger woods, and they're quite common north of High Island, but in High Island itself, they're not so common because they like bigger, thicker, denser woods. And of course, barred owl has one of these absolute classic North American bird calls. I'm sorry if you know it well. I'm sorry if it's familiar to you, but I'm going to play it anyway. Who cooks for you? The barred owl. And so that brings us an end to the main tour. On day 6, once we've done our time in High Island, we head back to Houston. And this is a sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. So the main tour is actually 6 days. So you fly out on day 6. And then those of you who are staying on to make it into a 10-day tour for the extension, we have to drive west anyway to Houston to get to where we're going, which is Kerrville in the hill country. So we drive through Houston on the way and drop the 6-day people there, and then move on to the hill country ourselves late on the afternoon/evening of day 6. So I think I may have said the main tour was 7 days earlier. Of course, I meant 7 days, meaning 6 days. Sorry about that. So 6-day main tour, 10 days if you take the extension. So this is where we're finished on the Gulf of Mexico, and we head west into the dry hill country of Texas. And so with a change of section on this tour, there comes a costume change. So I'm changing into my final shirt of the tour, you'll be relieved. This is a Kentucky warbler, drawn in High Island. Magnificent drawings here from a local artist. I'll give you her name at the end. So now we're moving on to the Hill Country Extension. Hill Country Extension, we visit areas west of Houston, all the areas in red here. So after we've dropped people off after the 6-day main tour in Houston Airport, I'm hoping we've dropped off no one, and in fact everyone is here for the extension, and hopefully you'll understand why. We drive straight west from Houston into much different habitat. We're going to stay the first night in Kerrville, and then the second night is spent in a place called Utopia, which is near, sort of between Rio Frio and Concan. Then we basically spend some time birding around Concan and Uvalde on the last morning before going back towards Houston Airport and spending the night in Houston before our departure on day 10 from Houston. So the drive here takes about 4 hours. So usually by the end of the afternoon on the first day of the extension, on day 6 of the main tour, if you like, we're usually getting into habitat for some birds like golden-fronted and ladderback woodpeckers, woodhouses, scrub jay. So yeah, we're very likely to start picking up new species which we'll not have seen on the coast. So on the first morning after we've had our night in Kerrville, we go to the Kerr Wildlife Management Area, which is an area which has got hundreds of breeding golden-cheeked warblers and black-capped vireos, 2 very local breeding species in North America. Golden-cheeked warbler winters in Central America, but its entire breeding population is on the Edwards Plateau of the Hill Country in West Texas. So it's like the key bird of the extension, and it's usually fairly easy to find if you listen for its call, which I'm going to play now. Here's the golden-cheeked warbler, a Texas breeding endemic. So this is the habitat of our second sort of major specialty of the hill country. For me, the best looking vireo in all of North America, the black-capped vireo. I'm going to play you the song in a second, but I should also make the point that just this hill country section is such a different type of birding and type of habitat. Lots of juniper, oaks. It's very dry compared to the coast, so the bird life is very different. There's a lot of new species, things like black-throated sparrow are possible, lark sparrow, rufous crowned sparrow, lazuli bunting, and then we also get into the Rio Grande birds a bit later on, but I'll get to that in a minute. So after we've done this morning in Kerr Wildlife Management Area, we get on to Lost Maples, which you can also hear the call of the black-capped vireo, and I'm going to play you that now. And Lost Maples is a beautiful place. Obviously, it's got maples, it's hills and canyons, and it's got some little feeders. It's really just kind of a backup site for the black-capped vireo and golden-cheeked warbler, but has nice breeding birds like Louisiana water thrush. You get birds like blue grosbeak around the feeders. But it's also just a beautiful place and so nearby it would be a travesty to miss it. So our day is taken up with those 2 major sites, and then at the end of the day, we move to this place here. So we go to a place called Rio Frio, which is a famous bat cave. More than 10 million Mexican free-tailed bats live in this cave. That's the second largest gathering of mammals that are not humans on Earth. And they come out well before dark. You don't have to be like the Batmen here. And I'm going to show you a video in a minute. And while you're at the back, before we get there in daylight, and you can see things like rock and canyon wrens around there, and cave swallows also share the cave with the bats. So yeah, it's an amazing wildlife experience. I've been all over the world birding, and this for me was one of my best wildlife encounters. Press play on these bats here. This is just a tiny fraction of more than 10 million bats, remember, at least 10 million. And of course, they go on until well into darkness. I'm not sure what time we'll stay, but you don't have to be there till we become Batmen like the TV guides. But yeah, so the other thing to mention is when you're there prior to dark, raptors come in and prey on the bats as well, which is really cool. So you get things like some of the birds that are recorded there are like red-tailed hawk, zone-tailed hawk, peregrine falcon, American kestrel. All of these birds have been seen sort of going after the bats. So it's just too hard to resist millions of prey items in the sky all at once. So yeah, it's really cool. So that night, we just go about 20 minutes from Rio Frio and spend the night in Utopia. And then the next day, we spend some time at the feeders at Concan and also visit a slough near Uvalde. where you get things Rio Grande like birds, like green jay here, but also things like ringed and green kingfisher, Pyriloxia, great kiskadee, along with sort of dry country, hill country birds around Konkan like lark sparrows, black-throated sparrows, Luzuli buntings, orioles, sometimes even tropical Perulia if you're really lucky. So yeah, I mean, hopefully you'll really get a feel for this place. It's an awesome combination of upper Texas coast migratory songbirds, migratory waterbirds, migratory shorebirds, combining it with hill country birds, which are completely different, including the two mega specialties, golden cheek warbler and black-capped vireo. So the extension of main tour are very different. Main tour is 6 days. Extension is 10 days, and it's well worth doing it all. So after this, I'm sure you want to go back to Texas. It's that kind of place, particularly migratory sites. They're just addictive, and I've been going there, and I can't wait to get back. So I really hope you enjoyed the virtual tour, and thanks for watching.